both will be rescheduled for a later date. To talk much more about what's going on with the Nets and their situation, let's bring in Michael Scotto, a writer and podcast host on Hoops Hype. Michael, appreciate your time here. There's a lot to get into with the Nets, but first let's start with the health of the team and the overall outbreak that is happening with the Nets. What's the latest you're hearing?
And it's certainly a crazy situation. Yesterday, before the game against Orlando, Day'Ron Sharpe was warming up, thought he was going to play, and then before the game, he got ruled out because of health and safety protocols. Right now, knock on wood, Blake Griffin and Patty Mills have been two of the few guys that have been able to avoid going into those protocols right now. But it's a concerning situation for the staff and certainly for the league to get these next two games for the Nets postponed to try to give them a chance to have that roster recuperate. You know, one scout that was at the game yesterday joked with me that it was like the G League showcase was at Barclays Center instead of Vegas because of all the G League guys that got called up and the hardship exceptions that were given out for both the Orlando Magic and the Brooklyn Nets. So it's certainly spreading around the league right now. But in terms of Brooklyn, it's obviously peaked right now, and they're trying to get it under control as best they can. They canceled the practice as well. Coming up as well. So they're trying to do everything they can to contain it and hopefully get their stars and their bench players back as soon as possible once they resume play after those two games
and Michael,
post-moment.
Michael, with Kevin Durant, this is particularly a strange situation because he's a guy who is vaccinated. We know that because he wouldn't be able to play in New York City for home games if he wasn't. But he had COVID. He tested positive during last season. So this just seems, and obviously proving that you can obviously get the virus more than one time.
Oh, absolutely. And look, Durant was in health and safety protocols multiple times last season. It's just as much around, who you are around. And it could be anybody from a gentleman or a woman that's driving them to the game in an Uber. You know what I mean? That's what's kind of scary. And you and Smitty and D3 kind of alluded to it beforehand. You can't see it. You can't wear the mask all the time as well. So it's as much around about the people you're around. And obviously, the Nets, in terms of their practice facility and whatnot, they've tried to limit it. All the coaches, they're wearing masks and whatnot. But once you go outside the confines of the practice facility and the arena, everybody lives their lives differently. And unfortunately, it's spread around them. For the Nets in particular, though, they were just as worried about Kevin Durant's minutes right now. He's third in the league in minutes played at 37 a game. And that partly had to do with why the team was willing to have Kyrie Irving come back on a part-time basis as well.
Yeah, and let's get into Kyrie here. There's no question the added stress and load on KD, and he was putting up unbelievable numbers, certainly right there in the MVP conversation. But before we get to the impact on the court, I just want to get to what I feel like is the obvious here with Kyrie. The whole reason why he's not playing this year is because he's not vaccinated. And less than 24 hours after the Nets decide to bring him back into the fold, he clearly had a negative test that triggered others to be tested. And now he is out for a period of time due to health and safety protocol. What are the Nets saying about this?
There's not much to say. They don't know, how it could have came about right now. But the biggest thing for Kyrie was it wasn't like this was a ramp up to get him to play. Now, when you look at the Nets, what they usually do is they'll give a guy a couple of practices to get back into shape coming off from an injury. They are the most cautious franchise when it comes to that. And you look at the schedule, Jared, coming up for the Nets, and they're going to be on the road, which potentially would be when Kyrie could play, the 23rd, the 25th, and the 27th. But I don't think he's going to be available for those games at this point due to the protocols right now, and also because he needs time to get back into shape. I'm not saying he's out of shape, but game shape is a different story. So I could see a scenario where in January of 2022, maybe at the earliest, you're looking at him back. That's my personal view on it. Time will tell on that, though, for sure. And, like I said earlier with the Nets, Durant's played the third most minutes, and James Harden's eighth. He's playing 36 minutes a night. They scrapped the whole continuity aspect once Durant and Harden and the rest of the team was going down. At this point, it's all about having able bodies, and even having Kyrie available for road games for the Nets at this juncture of the season, and with the unpredictability of COVID right now, it appealed to them. And the players, they didn't necessarily mind that. They all like Kyrie as a person, at least here in Brooklyn, from the guys that I know and talk to. And the coaching staff, they get a guy that, hey, we can plug him in, and on those nights that he can play, they're better for it. It makes everyone's lives easier on the court. Off the court, there's certainly bigger risks that are involved. And in particular, Kyrie Irving in particular is accepting of that because he's not vaccinated and putting himself at risk. But all parties agreed to it, and here we are, Jared.
Yeah, it is quite the about face, the comments from the general manager to the head coach to the players. They were, as you referenced, quite honest that it's no longer about this team mentality where everybody has to be all in. It's about we need bodies. I'm just curious, though, they have a realistic approach that this plan will play itself out, that if the Nets, they're going to make the playoffs, that he's not going to play in home games during the playoffs, and he's only going to be available for road games in a particular series? And that's if they don't play the Knicks or the Raptors in the playoffs?
Well, Jared, what's interesting about that, obviously it's a fluid situation, but there were some people in the Nets organization that thought Kyrie would get vaccinated. Now, with that said, if he's in the building, maybe they think that they can eventually convince him to. Like, as you get closer to the playoffs and you have a chance to win a championship, you have to wonder if Kevin Durant, who he came to Brooklyn with in free agency, and that was the reason why, might nudge him a little and try to get him back. I mean, I know Durant's not necessarily that type of guy, but as you get closer to the playoffs, we're in uncharted territory. We don't know what it's going to look like. And the same thing for James Harden, who, last year dealt with hamstring injuries. What if he gets hurt again and hurts his hamstring, or one of them goes back into the protocols? Just because you go into the protocols now doesn't mean you won't again. So I think right now that, they've all held out hope. One, the organization has held out hope that he would return. Here we are. That has happened. I think now you're maybe looking to put the cherry on top if you're the Nets, and maybe see if being around the other guys that have been vaccinated, and it's been a prolonged period of time, getting boosters and whatnot, maybe they can be in his ear and convince him that maybe that is the right path for him. He has stated he's not anti-vax.
Right.
So maybe there is a path where he can get it at some point. Obviously, it hasn't been to now, but if you're the Nets, you might as well hold out hope and give it a shot while he's in your building around the other guys who are vaccinated and he's close with. I think that's their best shot.
Well, Michael, this is the perfect example of an organization feeling the burden of pressure to win a championship, and win a championship right now. And that's why they made this about face. Great points by you. Really appreciate your perspective. Hopefully everybody out there checks out Michael Scotto's work on Hoops Hype, both the website and their podcast. Michael, appreciate it. And with the Nets game being postponed Tuesday night, we now have had to adjust our NBA on TNT schedule. So Kevin Harlan, Stan Van Gundy, and me will head to South Beach instead of Brooklyn for the Heat and Pacers